So in a very important way, Trump has sided, more or less sided, with, let's call them the restrainers, the people who want to work out deals.
So recently, John Mearsheimer was on Judging Freedom, that's Andrew Napolitano's podcast, to talk about several things related to foreign policy, including the recent news that several members of the Trump administration had actually talked Trump out of greenlighting a potential Israeli strike against Iran. I want to just check out if he thinks this is legitimate and what it means for our foreign policy in terms of Iran and Israel. Let's watch and let's react.
Do you have a sense that the neocons in the Trump administration are becoming ascendant?
Ascendant is too strong a word. I think that they're one of two factions in the administration. Let's call them let's call the other side the restrainers here. I think the restrainers are a formidable force, but there's no question that the neoconservatives are there in large presence as well. And there's sort of a stalemate between the two sides, which is why Trump is not moving forward on either Iran or Ukraine.
So I generally agree with Mearsheimer here too. There is neocon influence in this administration clearly, and we've seen that in terms of the Zionist bent toward Israel. We all knew that that would be a present element of Trump's administration, but we've also seen it when it came to bombing Yemen, which is connected to the Israeli thing, but a lot of people wouldn't have assumed, months before Trump was elected that he would bomb Yemen so soon, or bomb Yemen at all, in fact. In fact, during his campaign, he mocked the idea in an interview with Tim Pool. But Mearsheimer is right here. You are seeing kind of a power struggle in this administration. I disagree with him a little bit when it comes to the stalemate. So far, it seems like the neocons are generally getting what they want, including the restoration of aid to Ukraine.
The New York Times published a very interesting piece claiming that some of his inner circle, one of whom surprised me if the piece is accurate, talked him into saying no to Prime Minister Netanyahu when Netanyahu was last in Washington about a week ago about whether or not Trump would give Netanyahu the green light to attack Iran. I know sometimes you think it would be Netanyahu would be giving a green light to Trump. We can get into that if you want. But according to the New York Times, based on leaks from inside the Pentagon, of all people, Secretary Hegseth was on the side of the restrainers. Now, 3 people in his inner circle were summarily escorted from the Pentagon in the past 48 hours. Whether he or whoever made the decision to remove them believes they were the leakers or not, I don't know. But do you find credible the idea that some of the people around Trump, that the restrainers were triumphant in this respect?
No, I don't find it surprising at all. In large part because if you read the article carefully, it made no strategic sense to attack Iran. I mean, first of all, the article makes clear, and this is an extremely important point to understand. The article said that the most you could do was set the program back for 1 or more years. Just think about that. We're not talking about going in here and destroying this program once and for all.
Well, what program are you talking about? Nuclear enrichment?
Yeah, you're talking, at least the nuclear enrichment and reprocessing capabilities.
Okay, because you know that the American intel community has told the president there hasn't been any nuclear weapons development.
No, there's been no nuclear weapons development. And I've said that on the show many times.
Right.
The point is that what matters here is the fact that Iran has an enrichment and reprocessing capability. And that's what the Israelis want to eliminate. So your question about what the target set would look like is an important one because it could be that we're just going after the enrichment and reprocessing capabilities, or it could be that we're going after the entire nuclear set of installations in Iran, in which case you would be talking about a massive attack.
Yeah, so I'm mostly with Mearsheimer here. First of all, I'll say without qualifiers, if this story is true, it's a good thing that Trump and Netanyahu kind of had to fall into this Trump preferred policy of not bombing Iran. If that is true, if the story is true without qualifier, it's a good thing. I don't want U.S. forces involved in yet another war right now, and the Trump administration could go down in terms of popularity if that happened anyway. So I can understand it in a way if it happened. However, I actually think Mearsheimer is being a little bit charitable toward Israel here. Israel does want to eliminate Iran's uranium enrichment program. There's no doubt about that. But for decades, top administration officials, including Netanyahu, have talked about a desire for regime change in Iran. So they want more than to end the uranium enrichment program. That's for sure. So if regime change was on the table, I'm hoping that, Trump sees the light and sees the better kind of stewards of his administration weigh in on that and influence him in the right way. I haven't been too impressed by them so far because of what's happened in Yemen and, greenlighting Netanyahu to violate the terms of the ceasefire and continue going to war in Gaza and the Palestinian cleansing campaign and Trump's restoration of aid to Ukraine. But we'll see.
Because you want to remember, when we go in there and the Israelis go in there, you have to tear apart their ground-based defense networks as well. You just don't go in there and get a free shot. There are lots of other targets that you have to deal with. You have to cut a corridor into the place, and then you have to be able to sustain aircraft over the targets for a sustained period of time.
The president's golfing buddy, the senior senator from South Carolina, Lindsey Graham, wants him to destroy oil refineries. That would have a catastrophic effect on the world economy, would it not?
Yeah, absolutely. I've said before that I think what the Iranians ought to do is tell the Americans that if they attack their nuclear sites or they attack oil infrastructure, that the Iranians will target oil installations across the Middle East and shut down the flow of oil, at least out of the Persian Gulf. And you want to remember that 20% of the world's oil comes out of the Gulf. So given the state of the international economy these days with all these tariffs, having a crisis of that sort involving the flow of oil out of the Middle East would be catastrophic.
And by the way, you can be pretty sure that if Lindsey Graham is advising you to a particular policy position, it will have catastrophic effects, not only economically, but also in terms of U.S. foreign policy, getting the U.S. into debt, just as the policies he's always supported have. There's no question about that.
I think it would have huge deterrent effect. And by the way, I'm sure that the Trump people, when they were deciding whether or not to go along with this attack in May by the Israelis, had that in their mind, right? It is a serious question whether attacking Iran will not lead to attacks on oil production in the region.
Is Netanyahu reckless enough to do this without the United States?
It's possible. I have a very unusual view on what's going on here.
Let's hear it.
I actually, let me just say one more thing about what the New York Times said. It's clear from the New York Times piece that it would be better to do this in the fall, in October, than to do it now. As the Americans pointed out to the Israelis, we just need a lot more time to plan this. We can't do this as a fly by the seat of your pants operation. And furthermore, it would be very helpful if we could use Israeli commandos. And the newspaper story says explicitly that those commandos won't be ready until October. So the question is, why not wait? Why go now? My view is that the principal aim here, not the only aim, but the principal aim is to cause a region-wide conflagration, all for the purposes of ethnically cleansing the Palestinians. To ethnically cleanse the Palestinians out of Gaza, you need a major conflict. You need a major war. And that provides the cover for the Israelis to go to work on the Palestinians in Gaza.
Yeah, we've seen the inclination among Likud and Netanyahu's government to create a greater Israel. A lot of people think that he wants to take full control of the West Bank. There's been flirtations with Syrian occupation, especially after its upheaval recently and the overthrow of the Assad regime. It's hard to say. I too agree with Mearsheimer that it's possible Netanyahu would go through with this strike without the U.S. because precedents assure us that he's willing to take steps even if they contravene what seems to be the preferences of the Trump administration. And the big one that comes to mind is getting out of the ceasefire that Trump orchestrated on the eve of his election to his second term. Netanyahu basically talked him into allowing it to be violated. And, you know, there's been bombing campaigns throughout Gaza in the last few weeks, just as the U.S. has had bombing campaigns within Yemen. So
I think they fully understand that there's no way they could take out Iran's nuclear capabilities for the long term, maybe for a year or two or three, but that's it. But the reason they want to do it, and the reason they want to do it quickly, is they see that there is an opportunity now to fully cleanse Gaza, if they can create a region-wide conflagration involving the United States where everybody takes their eye off the Palestinian problem. In other words, it provides cover.
Add to that the overwhelming desire of Prime Minister Netanyahu to get the Israeli public's eye off of his failures and the crumbling Israeli society and unite them behind a war against his professed demons.
Yeah, there's no question about that. War is good for him. The more conflict there is, the more war there is, the better for him. The problem is that huge chunks of his society and the IDF itself have had it with all these wars. They need a break. They need to put an end to all these conflicts. And again, he understands that, which is why he wants to strike now, before he's forced into a situation where he can no longer keep all those troops in Gaza and be in a position to cleanse Gaza.
Yeah, I think this is a really good point, and one of the reasons why a lot of people stated that the U.S. was bombing Yemen was because Ansar Allah, the leading government there, actually supported the Palestinians, one of the only regional powers to do that, and they said that's a reason that the U.S. is bombing Yemen. That might be true too, but also I think that the point hidden under this is that kind of diversion in the Middle East allows Netanyahu to continue his policy of genocide in Israel. So that is a major factor too, and I think Mearsheimer is totally right here. Just like a strike on Iran would be. That's why they want it so soon.
You want to remember, he is, since the ceasefire broke down, moved large numbers of troops into Gaza. They say they now control 1/3 of Gaza. That puts them in an excellent position to cleanse Gaza. But they have to do that undercover. And I think a war against Iran would do the trick.
The same article also opined that Iran is weak militarily. Here is a clip of our colleague, Colonel McGregor, making the opposite argument. He's on another show, Colonel Daniel Davis, and he chastises Davis. Well, you'll hear what he says. Chris, number 15.
What nation on the planet can have their embassy destroyed in another country and to have an assassination in their capital city on an inauguration and not go to war with somebody? Yet that's exactly what Iran didn't do, because they don't have the power to do it. So that should tell you.
Wait a minute. That's
tell.
false. That's a fundamentally false statement.
Which part?
False. They don't have the power to go to war. You haven't looked carefully at Iran. Iran's arsenal of missiles is enormous. It could flatten Israel in a day. They have the power to go to war. They have chosen repeatedly to avoid war. And I've said this 1,000 times. No one in the Middle East is interested in a war except Israel and the United States.
Agreed, Professor Mearsheimer?
Colonel McGregor has said it 1,000 times. I'm sad to say I've only said it 500 times, but there's no question that it's Israel that's driving this train.
Yeah, I totally agree. By the way, I respect both Davis and McGregor, but in this one, McGregor is right. It's all relative when it comes to weakness of world powers, but relative to some of the other powers that the U.S. has bombed recently, like Yemen, Iran is a major power in comparison, and it has the capacity to propel its might in the region where there are a lot of U.S. forces and there are a lot of Israeli forces and Israeli settlements. So absolutely, Iran, when you're dealing with them militarily, it's a different power when compared to powers like Yemen, which is really maybe the poorest country in the entire world. And I think it is the poorest country in the Middle East at the very least.
If you look at what happened in April and in October of last year, in both instances, the Israelis tried to drag us into a war with Iran. And both the Iranians and the Biden administration did not want a war. And according to this New York Times story, here we are again. The Iranians obviously don't want a war, and the Trump administration doesn't want a war. But who wants a war? It's the Israelis.
And the neocons around Trump.
Yeah, there's no question about
Well,
it.
the neocons around Trump want the Ukraine war to continue, don't they?
Yeah, they're warmongers. There's no question about it. There's no question about that.
So that they would undermine Mr. Witkoff's negotiations with Vladimir Putin, with Hamas, with the Israelis, and with the Iranian foreign minister, if they could. They would undermine all of that. They want both wars. They want one to start and another is to continue.
Absolutely. What's very interesting here is that Witkoff is Trump's right-hand man. He's more or less his alter ego on these three big issues that you're describing. So in a very important way, Trump has sided, more or less sided, with, let's call them the restrainers, the people who want to work out deals. But the fact is, he brought into his administration all of these super hawkish Zionists, and he also has been acting in a very ham-fisted way. And the end result is he's been unable to execute in ways that satisfy his basic inclinations regarding both Ukraine and Iran. So he's in a really tough spot at this point.
Yeah, I somewhat agree with him here. I think Trump's impulses in terms of non-intervention and certainly his rhetoric has shown to be better than a lot of his counterparts, and certainly better than Harris and all the neocons in the Bush dynasty, right? But I don't agree with Mearsheimer in terms of the restrainers exerting more power or influence over this administration. Certainly not in the first few months. Trump could have ended all support to Ukraine, totally turned his back on Zelensky, and he hasn't. He restored aid to Ukraine for the sake of this insane minerals deal. He thought that would be the win that he could use to say, hey, you know, I'm a tough guy, I can deal with Putin. Is a stupid minerals deal with Ukraine and the ceasefire that Russia didn't accept anyway. And in terms of Israel, he can bomb Yemen and basically saber rattle with Iran, notwithstanding this new story, which again, if true, is a good thing. But the thing with this new story too is it doesn't preclude a US strike on Iran, which has been flirted with several times in the past. And clearly Israel and the Israel lobby wants. So I don't agree with Mearsheimer that the restrainers have had more influence lately in this administration. Maybe over this ordeal. I'll give him that if it's true, but not in terms of his entire administration.
Why doesn't he just say to Netanyahu, we're not sending you any more weapons? Well, we know the answer to that because of the donor class, but what does he have to fear?
Yeah, we all know it's AIPAC and the Israel lobby there.
And why doesn't he say to Zelensky, we're not sending you any more weapons? He could stop both of those wars with a phone call.
He could. And look, he's going to have to, in my opinion, bite the bullet at some point. Let's just talk about the Ukraine war. If he doesn't bite the bullet, if he doesn't side with Witkoff, if he doesn't go with his own inclinations, the war is going to go on, and he's going to end up looking just like Joe Biden. He's going to end up employing the same policies as Biden, and he's not going to end the Ukraine war unless it's ended on the battlefield, and he won't be responsible for that. And he will be blamed for losing the war. So he has a deep-seated interest in ending this war as quickly as possible, but he's been unable to pull the trigger.
Totally agree with that. Trump was right in the rhetoric that he had during his campaign. It was pie in the sky when it comes to status quo U.S. foreign policy, where he said, I can end this war in 24 hours, but he truly could. If he withdrew all U.S. resources and intelligence and financing and funding from that theater with a Republican Congress that he can whip to do this, he could end that war. But he wants to be this grand negotiator, I think, and really have it on his legacy and have it on his record that he was the one that created a peace in this war, much like Theodore Roosevelt was in 1905, settling the Russo-Japanese War that way. That is pointed to as one of Roosevelt's greatest accomplishments. I think Trump wants that sort of, accomplishment on his legacy too. But the end game should be ending U.S. involvement in the region, not a peace. If U.S. involvement is withdrawn, there'd have to be a peace with Europe. So Trump has a lot of power here, and as long as Russia views the U.S. as a belligerent, which it is in Russia's view because the U.S. has bankrolled this war, there can't be a peace. If the U.S. is still dumping money into Ukraine, how can there be a peace? There has to be an assurance that discontinues, and the first sign of good faith in that regard would be to ending the financing of this war. Same when it comes to Israel. As long as the U.S. and the Trump administration support the Israel lobby, there will always be saber rattling with Iran, just as there was with Syria and Iraq and targeted strikes against Yemen and the drone wars in Yemen and all sorts of other catastrophic wars like Libya, which the Israel lobby wanted to and was on the list of 7 countries in 5 years that Wesley Clark spoke about so long ago. So we'll have to see what happens. What do you think, though? Let me know in the comments. Have the restrainers or the neocons exerted more influence so far in the Trump administration? I want to hear from you in the comments. Let me know your answer to that. And until I talk to you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Take it easy, guys. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out.